In the second chunk, we're just going to have a look at misleading graphs. So misleading graphs give a false impression about data. You might say, a bad way to represent them, or they could be a good way if you actually want to misrepresent the data. So if you're an advertising agency and you want to influence people a certain way, you can use misleading graphs to try and influence people. But they give a false impression about data. And so the way, if we just look at what's in our textbook here first, and we'll go down, when only part of the scale is drawn, the difference between results can be exaggerated. If one column has a different size or colour, it may appear to have greater value than the other columns. When pictograph symbols are not the same size, the larger symbol appears to have a higher value. And a measure of centre can be misleading if it's not a fair representation of the centre of the data value. So let's have a quick look down the bottom at this I've taken out of Year 11 standard. Same sort of thing. So what it was going, misleading graph, scale on the vertical axis does not start at 0. So what you can see if you don't start them on 0, so we should have an example of one of those here. Okay, so graph C, this doesn't start at 0, so it looks as if there's a big difference. But if we were to graph that off from 0, this one on the left, graph C, is actually graph D. So you can see graph D doesn't look anything like graph C. Graph D look as if the results haven't changed much. We can see they started at 12, they went to 15, but graph C makes it look like the results have increased by a huge amount. So that's one way of misleading. Scale on the vertical axis or the horizontal axis is irregular. That means it's not even. So if it's not even, we're looking for an example of that. Here we have it over here. 5, no, we don't miss irregular axes. Have they got an actual example of that? They don't have it here, but what it can be is if your gaps aren't the same. So a scale of that proportion might have us with a line like this, and it might go 10 here, then it might go 20, and then all of a sudden this might be 60. So that when we're graphing it, the difference is a big difference here actually looks like a small difference. So that would be if the scales weren't the same. Then our next one was the scale on the vertical horizontal is misleading. The use of area or volume creates a false impression. So there's an example here. Because this is probably twice this, but because they've done the volume, it looks a lot more, same as this one. They both look a lot bigger than double the size, because instead of keeping the column at the same width, they've also made them wider. Now the last example that I had there will come back up here. So what it's saying here, the data on the histogram, the mean wage of $8.50 here is actually bigger than all wages except for this one. So the median wage of $6.20 is actually larger, is a better representation of the average wage in this case, except for the fact that because we've got 4 data, the median is actually in here. So the median is the average of those two. So the median would be $6.95. So the median wage of $6.95 is a better representation. I guess what they're saying is that then $8.50. All right. Okay, so what we would do in this case is we would take that out. So your examples that we've got in chunk 2, the examples that we're looking at is we should have a graph here which looks like I've completely missed, so I will need to either paste in 7 or we might just start with 8. In fact, that is not related to the question, so I'll just get rid of it for this stage. Looking at this one, it's asked us for graph A and graph B. We've got 2 graphs there. It's our TV channel performance, and they've graphed it 2 different ways. So it's asking, looking at graph A, so looking at that first graph, write down how many viewers preferred each channel. So you're going to write down your channels, 15, 16, 17, 18, and just write next to it how many people preferred each one. Which graph could be titled Channel 15 is clearly the most popular? Which one shows it clearly? I guess A or B. It says, which graph could be titled all TV channels have similar popularity? So which of those? Now remember, when we're looking at these two things, we can see what's going on. This one, our graph starts, well, it starts at 5. It doesn't even start at 0. But this one, it starts at 23. And so the second one, the scale, the difference between them is exaggerated. All right, so sorry, well, D, what is the difference between the two graphs? I guess I've just answered that. You can write that down. And which graph is misleading and why is it misleading? So there your question 8. Question 9, looking at this one here. Now it says this column graph shows, a column graph, categorical data, shows the number of sales for 1 month of 4 popular breakfast cereals. The height of each column represents the scale sales. So list the breakfast order cereals in order of scale. Might just change colour and make this one red. So down here is where you're listing, or in your book. So I'll actually list the breakfast orders in order of sale. So down here, reading them out, that's Sunshine cereal, Energy cereal, Chunky cereal, and Yum Crunch cereal. So you need to list them. I might just go S, E, C, and Y. So when you're listing them, just use those letters, and then you're going to get the, you just need to list them in the order of sales. B, did Yum Chunch have more sales than the other cereals? So is Y the biggest, yes or no? You have to answer that question. Have a look at them carefully. C, this 3 changes have been made to the Yum Chunch column to make it look as though it's a better sales than any other of the cereals. So they've just told you they've done something to make it look bigger. We need 3 things. So list them, 1, 2, 3. What are the 3 things they've done to try to convince you that they've had more sales? And D, how should the columns be drawn so the graph is not misleading? So that is a description there. All right, so they are your chunk 2. Remember, when you have done those, there's plenty of questions also over here, which are listed on G2. You may need to get your parents at home to read those out. Remember that doing this first one is a minimum. Some of you are listening to this might be fine just doing those. Others who really want to or have the ability to get or able to work faster really should be looking to do the examples we've got over here and getting their parent to read them out or trying to do them themselves.